anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
What do you think about Iran? Would you hit Iran? And he goes, as long as they don't hit the nuclear stuff. That's the thing you want to hit, right?
Yeah, I know. As we're getting closer and closer, inching to the finish line on this incredible, incredible journey that we find ourselves on every single 4 years. By we, I mean the world, by the way. I know, I'm not American, but oftentimes Americans of both sides, either liberals or Republicans, will get very mad at me when I talk about American politics, not in the way they like. If I talk about it in the way that they politically enjoy and want to hear, they'll retweet me, they'll share me, they'll like it. But if I step out of line and say things like, you know, genocide bad, then I usually get a lot of people replying with, you're a Canadian, this doesn't affect you. Unfortunately, because of just your raw, sheer, incredible, big swinging dick power, America, your shit does actually affect all of us, the rest of the world, pretty conclusively. It's kind of the part and parcel of being number one. You're the empire. You're the biggest one. You got the most military bases in the most amount of countries. You got the biggest weapons, biggest military, most almost everything except for nukes. That's where, you know, Putin slightly edges you out, but that doesn't really matter. You only really need, like, you know, 10 or 20 to destroy the planet. So it's not as if you have to worry about there. Once you get more than that, it's just really about again, swinging big old dicks. So there's that aspect. And yeah, the thing is, Canada, we're you know, got the massive border. I'd say it's the largest open shared border in the world between two giant nations, and yours is obviously much larger than ours and much more powerful, but we do provide each other with a lot of stuff. Clean water, wood, electricity. That's what we from British Columbia ship to you, America, and then you in turn give us stuff and back and forth and stuff like that. So it does concern both me and I think the world what happens in the old American election. And there's a bunch of clips that are going around right now of Kamala Harris not sounding great.
Listen, I plan on having a Republican in my cabinet.
I got a list.
Yes, right. You asked me what's the difference between Joe Biden and me. Well, that will be one of the differences. I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet because I don't feel burdened by letting pride get in the way of a good idea.
Yeah. Right.
It's bipartisan.
Oh, nonsense. This clip's going around, the 60 Minutes clip's going around. That one's worse. The one where it's basically trying to get something completely, in any way, shape, or form, different from the obviously genociding supported tactics of the Biden administration. But, you know, non-answers, more bullshit. I feel kind of like as we're getting closer to the end now, that it's feeling more and more like a Hillary Clinton campaign, one in which it's very condescending to people who don't understand the broader vision, which is that if you don't support us in all ways, then effectively you support Trump, which again doesn't win elections. Hillary Clinton's strategy of, you know, ignoring large percentages of the electoral college and certain swing states and you know, alienating voters in that regard doesn't result in elections. Pokemon go to the polls. It's what people did. People did go to the polls. She beat Trump in the popular vote. More Americans voted for Hillary Clinton than they voted for Donald Trump. But then, and yes, it does still come down to the swing states and the old electoral college. But I'll tell you this, libs, no amount of trying to vote shame people who are rightfully disgusted by genocide is going to win the election. It's not your strategy going forward. You might want to concentrate on maybe the 40% of Americans who don't vote at all. That would probably be a larger success rate if you're trying to reach out and appeal to people than simply trying to condescend to people who hate Trump already, because you're basically just alienating them further by going, hey, you're all Trump supporters. And they're like, no, we're not. And you're like, yeah, you are, because you're not full-throatedly supporting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
I'm Donald Trump, and I...
Yeah, not great. It would be nice, you know, if there was more room to work with, especially for people who hate Donald Trump, who are scared of Donald Trump, who don't want Donald Trump to come to power. And that includes people who don't live in America. I know sometimes that seems weird because we've got this bizarre argument that is happening a lot on the internet, but also I'm sure within the communities in America, people are discussing this topic. And it comes down to, hey, are you left of liberal? Or are you a progressive? Or are you someone who cares deeply about human rights globally, not simply within the country in which you live? You probably see the horrifying atrocities and realities of what the U.S. empire is enacting upon the world, both in being the world's largest military salesman, as well as their complete and utter support for Israel as it enacts a genocide and tries to start war on multiple fronts on Middle Eastern countries, many of whom were not in any way responsible for October 7th. That kind of shit does get very disgusting and difficult to try and square between the two. Now, one thing I do want to bring up, because I know that people often shit on me for saying you're picking your enemy. That's kind of still the way I see it. I've always kind of seen it that way, especially when it comes to an American election. It's very hard to ignore the noise once you get closer and closer to an American election because it dominates so much of the news cycles globally. It dominates Canadian news, it dominates European news, it dominates a lot of world news. Who's exactly going to become the new administration that's taking control of the world's largest empire, which happens to still be somewhat democratic, not completely democratic. There's still a obvious influence and monstrously huge influence with capitalists, corporations, influence lobbyists, all that kind of stuff. Super PACs influence it, but there still is the ability for you to have a vote and make your vote count in the democratic process. And so we should be, if you're in America, you're trying to listen to, people who are working on the behalf of solidarity movements with Palestinians, take into account that there's a number of factors to look at here. When I say you're picking your enemy, and it's kind of like a character selection screen, I say that as in this is not or should not be ever the totality of what you consider to be activism. I think that's kind of like how libs view politics. Like every 4 years, well, 2 years if you can count the midterms, but every 4 years comes the one time when you have to do an activism. And your activism comes in the form of you going out and you either campaigning, donating, or working for a political campaign, and then going and voting. And then afterwards, the activism's over. And that's why, famous liberal celebrities get to have this wonderful life where every 4 years they do a thing and then they're considered to be radical activists, Oh, it's one of those political artists. Yeah, no. They're really involved in the grass action movements and stuff like that because they made a TikTok video endorsing the Democrats, which, is in a lot of ways sometimes a much safer thing to endorse for that career trajectory. So this is from today's post from the Uncommitted National Movement.
Something clever Project 2025 did was put forth an objectively insane document that is so extensive, it's hard to actually conceptualize individual parts, effectively saturating a very real threat. So today, I wanted to talk about the specific ways Trump and Project 2025 would be disastrous for Palestinian human rights. As a Palestinian American, the current administration's handling of this genocide has been beyond enraging and demoralizing. But the reality is that it can get worse. Nobody wants a Trump presidency more than Netanyahu, because that is his ticket to wiping Palestine off the map. Under Trump, U.S. foreign policy took a sharp turn that prioritized Israel's hardline right-wing agenda. During his administration, Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and proposed a Middle East plan that effectively dismantled any pathway to Palestinian self-determination. But what's coming next, under Project 2025, is even more dangerous. This initiative promises to cut all humanitarian aid to Gaza and the West Bank, effectively closing off not just the meager resources getting in, but one of the only points of contact Gaza has with the outside world.
There cannot be, between Jordan and Israel, within a few miles of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa, there cannot be a state run by Palestinians because...
David Friedman, Trump's former ambassador to Israel, is pushing for the annexation of the West Bank and has openly advocated for expelling Palestinians from Gaza, making it clear that there's no place for Palestinians in their own land.
In Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable to...
Jared Kushner has echoed these sentiments, suggesting Gaza could be turned into a valuable waterfront property if Palestinians are forcibly relocated, proposing the entire population be moved to the Negev desert, allowing Israel to finish the job. These policies signal a future where Israeli expansion is no longer just tolerated by the US, but it's encouraged.
And once back in the White House, he will also keep his promise to help Israel win the current war without worrying about what the rest of the world might think.
Trump's top donor, Miriam Adelson, has pledged over $100 million to support his return to office, praising his past actions and pushing for even more aggressive pro-Israel policies. She's made it clear that Trump is viewed by Israel's right wing as a savior figure who will deliver on their most extreme goals, including massively expanding settlements. But the threat doesn't just stop overseas. Here at home, Project 2025 would severely limit activism by revoking legal protection for human rights organizations and criminalizing protests against Israeli policies, undermining our First Amendment and silencing the few voices advocating for Palestinian rights. Who will be elected in November is clear. It's Trump or it's Harris. And we have to orient less towards who is the better candidate and more towards what is the better anti-war approach in building our collective power. It's clear Netanyahu will be doing everything in his power to get Trump elected. And we have to do everything in our power to stop him.
So that's from the uncommitted movement in the United States and discussing it. Obviously, like, there is no good way to try and say, hey, by the way, did you know that things can get worse when it comes to what's taking place in Gaza? It's active genocide, and it's been completely and 100% supported by the Biden administration. Their only red line, which was Rafah, which caused the pause of a single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. That was the extent of it. Seems to not be a red line at all, and now it's destroyed, and now so much of the entire region is completely this is a period right now where at this point you're trying to prevent the mass death from both starvation and disease and complete and utter devastation and destruction. Gaza is destroyed from top to bottom. The whole place, like, the world watched as it took place over the course of the last year, and now the people who remain are basically forcibly being moved from one point to another while they're being bombed and assassinated and killed, while simultaneously being forcibly starved. So yeah, it is the worst possible situation that can occur right there. So from that argument, the thing is, I think anyone in America is well within their right to be so repulsed by what's happening that they don't even want to have an involvement in electoral politics. And most likely, if that is the course of action that you're taking, then you're less concerned about the upcoming American election and more concerned about doing direct action and hitting the streets and doing anything within your power to try and stop the mass death that is occurring. And people who are going to vote shame individuals in that regard, they're achieving nothing. It's basically like no one in that mindset is going to suddenly be like, oh, okay, lesser of two evils. Trolley. Okay, sorry, I didn't recognize that this was a trolley problem. Okay, well, in that case, yes, I will go canvass for a couple days. No one had told me. If you told me that there's a trolley problem here, then maybe absolutely I could look at this as something that I can try and fix on that end. From an electoral standpoint, you're essentially, because both sides are your enemy in this case, if you're a leftist, if you're a progressive, and if you're someone who cares about human rights. Essentially, if you're someone who cares about human rights, we should stop trying to reduce that just to a political ideology. But if you're someone who cares about human rights, ultimately what the United States is doing is grotesque, and it's absolutely abysmal, and both administrations have shown themselves to want to be doing that. The problem being with the Donald Trump presidency is a multitude of things. One, stacking judiciaries and also stacking Supreme Courts, stacking federal courts. That results in a lot of the most horrifying domestic policies and court decisions that you're seeing on a regular basis take place in the U.S. When that happens, it erodes the rights of the citizens of the U.S. When you erode the rights of the citizens of the U.S. and you're playing fucking catch up for things that people kind of took maybe for granted in their lifetime, such as having bodily autonomy. If you're a woman or a person who can give birth, all of a sudden, yeah, you might be spending your Sundays rather than doing, let's go to a Free Palestine rally, going to I need reproductive rights back rally. And yes, it will consume a lot of time. The same thing applies to BIPOC people. The same thing applies to LGBTQ plus people. As long as trans people and their very existence is being threatened by people trying to take away all forms of their health care, then that's a fight that they're going to have to concentrate on because, yes, it does directly concern them and their very quality of life. So that's something that obviously pulls people away. The other things that you can say immediately about a Donald Trump presidency outside of, stacking the federal courts, stacking the Supreme Courts and stuff like that is going to be devastating effects on environmentalism and the environment. Not that the Democrats are offering a solution that actually works towards reversing or even stalling climate change, but it's actively just accelerating on a gas pedal when you look at the policies and positions proposed by a person like Donald Trump, which again, as that exacerbates, natural disasters get worse. That makes it much, much more difficult for people to have to try. And things like growing collective consciousness or waking people up, or just even the very idea of, hey, by the way, we need to unify, not just as, Americans, but as humans globally, everywhere. We have global problems that concern us, whether they be pandemics, whether they be, the climate change disasters incoming. The last thing we should be doing is killing each other, fighting each other, and doing that nonstop. The worse things get for people's living conditions, the worse that people have to struggle to be able to pay for healthcare, be able to access education, being able to make ends meet, the more difficult in every way, shape, or form it becomes to start having free time to learn about this shit. There's no one reading Marx when they have 2 jobs and then they're worried about whether or not they're going to be able to buy enough food for their kids, kind of thing, right? There's no one doing that also when they're worried about how am I going to be paying off these hospital bills, these debtors, these credit card bills, all this kind of shit. Yeah, all of that relates back to, if you're looking at a bigger picture, right? If you're looking at ultimately what pathway are you going down, it becomes much harder to play on a harder difficulty setting, as per your federal government suddenly going over to, say, a Donald Trump. The only advantage I can personally calculate about having a Donald Trump come to power on that respect is that maybe, once again, it actually makes liberals moral. Like, they seem to flip. They seem to actually recognize human injustices when Trump's in power. Suddenly it's like, what he's doing at the border is disgusting. These immigration policies are abhorrent. I can't believe it. Look at how bad this is. What he's doing in Israel is catastrophic. Can you see this? It's going to destabilize the Middle East. Donald Trump bad. Orange man bad. And then all of a sudden you do have people who normally would just be like, you kids don't understand. This is in our self-interest. This is about maintaining security. This is de-escalation through escalation. You'd have to look at it like this. And okay, so that would be, I would say, a difference for sure, is all of a sudden the same liberals who spend all day fighting you for thinking that you're a child, for being like, but human rights should exist universally. Yeah, okay, fine. They might be suddenly calling Trump out, but then again, you'd have to wait 4 years for the next election cycle to get him out, at which point, hopefully, he's not using his new crowned SCOTUS powers, which allow him to potentially eliminate his political enemies, as long as it's within the purview of the executive branch. That stuff is stuff to worry about as well. But yeah, when it comes down to it fundamentally, those would be the closest things to key issues that I could tell you, even from an activist standpoint, is going to be how much more difficult can things be. They can be more difficult. One of the things that Donald Trump has both proposed and wants to enact, outside of reigniting the Muslim ban, is to permanently ban any refugees coming in from Gaza or the West Bank. It's one of the things that he said out loud multiple times, numerous news articles. Google it right now if you don't believe me. It's one of the things that he's immediately proposing that would make a material and dramatic difference in the people who are trying to escape and flee that conflict and region of the world and arrive safely to American shores. Well, they will then be prevented from doing that, which, again, would be one more extra step, right? It's like, well, now not only do we have to fight to try and end all weapon and military sales to Israel, which is something that, yes, the Biden administration has shown itself to just really want to do. Well, we're not only battling on that front, we're also now trying to undo this new ban on all refugees from Gaza and all refugees from the West Bank, because they've all been labeled as Hamas terrorists. Well, this makes this even more difficult then. There's literally another couple extra steps that one has to do. This is the reason why Palestinian Americans, as well as other members of the uncommitted movement, have been making this plea. Have they been treated with any modicum of respect from the Democrats? No. And shame on them. And like, I'm never going to stop calling out the horrors and atrocities of not only this administration, but a potential future administration that continues to go down the same pathway that the rest of the world has woken up to. You have to understand, there has literally been trillions of dollars and decades of propaganda and reinforcement of this ideology that has really suddenly shattered in the last year globally on a scale to which I've never seen in my lifetime. But for most people, they've been growing up with the same mantra, which is that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. As a result of it being the only democracy in the Middle East, it has to have complete military support from the United States to prevent it from being attacked by a whole bunch of savage and barbarous Muslims. All of these evil terrorist Muslim nations want to not only destroy it, but then destroy America. So it's the shield, you see. Israel is the shield against, again, all of these barbarous countries that want to destroy it and then eventually destroy America. And so that's why Israel has to be protected. That is the de-escalation through escalation. As long as we keep a strong military-supported Israel, it's allowed to do that. And what this genocide has really done is it's woken up so much of the world, including people who wouldn't have even been political about this topic, to suddenly recognize, holy shit, that's not what happens. This is occupation. This is illegal occupation. In fact, it's been defined as illegal occupation by numerous human rights organizations for years. Why haven't we been listening to them? Why does the press not tell me this side of the story? All I ever hear in mainstream media is the same thing. Evil terrorists, whether they be Hezbollah, whether they be Hamas, fired a couple rockets into Israel to do a terrorism. Luckily, the technology provided for by the United States prevented them from actually hitting any of the civilian targets they may have been trying to attack. And then life can return back to normal. They may need a couple bombings to just keep them in check, but after a couple buildings go down, maybe they take out Al Jazeera, who knows, then things can return to normal. And the permanent open-air prison occupation will continue unabated. Something that, like, no one is really on a large scale really making noise about, 5 years ago. It's something that, like, when Israel starts doing horrifying acts and ramps up, its bombing campaigns on the Gaza Strip in the past, people would start to make noise as soon as there's a ceasefire, as soon as things calm down. And obviously the death toll is going to be astronomical on one side. And then, yes, there will be a couple IDF soldiers who are also killed in the process. Then everyone gets scared again and they all go back into their shells. Even big celebrities who were so vocal a couple days ago suddenly are like, I just want to reaffirm that I believe in a two-state solution, and I believe Israel has a right to defend itself, and I'm going to revert back to that. And then hopefully now things will go back to normal for a little while. And then everyone ignores these kind of global conflicts. Like, everyone ignores what's going on in the Congo all the time. There's constantly news about it. There's constantly information about it. There's constantly, hey, did you know the very, minerals necessary to power your smartphone in your pocket cause immense, child slavery as well as human suffering, all this kind of stuff on a monstrously huge scale. It's so exploitative. This has a lot to do with you, Canada, by the way. Canada, the majority of Canadian mining corporations are the majority of the mining corporations of the world. We have 60% of the world's mining corporations. We're the world's leader, not in military, but in fucking extractive mining. And not a lot of Canadians know that or talk about that. And this is something that people need to wake up to, because you just enjoy your day-to-day quality of life living where you live, like all of us. Me too. I understand the privilege of how cozy life can be in the West sometimes, right? And how far removed we are from all of these kind of global conflicts. And then all of a sudden you hear about these things happening, and then it's just justified by saying, it's an inferior culture. It's an inferior civilization. Unfortunately, it's because they're so draconian backwards. Who knows? They're still stuck in medieval times, whatever it is. But that's why there's all that conflict going on over there all the time. That's the reason why they're always blowing each other up and fighting and all that kind of stuff. And they hate freedom. They hate that, and because they hate freedom too. And that's one of the reasons why. And it's never did you know how a lot of the benefits that we all know and enjoy and take for granted in the West come out of the extraction of other people? Just the human suffering globally that is necessary, both in the global south, in countries in Africa, all around the world, to make us have such nice things and stuff. And then we get kind of complainy when we go to other places. Like, you travel to McDonald's in France, and all of a sudden you're like, why do I have to get a ketchup pack? In Freedom Land, I just have unlimited ketchup. I just push down a thing and I can get buckets. I can get troughs of ketchup. And then yet they're giving me ketchup packs in this restrictive company. That's still a Western nation that still benefits entirely, again, from a lot of post-colonial, post-imperial resource extraction. But once we're waking up to that, that's a net good, that's a net benefit. It's what changed things. Again, it wasn't a single election, just one person being elected. I know some people are going to say Nelson Mandela, but it wasn't a single person being singularly elected that ended apartheid in South Africa. There had to be an entire global push for that, both politically, and yes, for some reason, Biden was able to see so clear through that issue, through that form of apartheid. At that moment, if you watch the old clips of Biden, he was like, yes, you are describing this perfectly. Listen to him. Listen to the words coming out of Biden's mouth right now. Who is this guy? But that requires, again, a global effort for companies to think, oh no, it is not good in your financial interest to do business with someone who's being directly associated with an apartheid regime. For consumers to be like, I'm not going to be supporting products that, again, directly profit off an apartheid regime. I'm going to be boycotting, and I'm going to be trying to avoid as best I can every single time that a company says we're going to be doing business in this region, we're going to be doing business in this. This is something that requires, again, a global push that is now a lot more possible than it ever was before, and it's come at the cost of so many thousands of children, so many thousands of women and men in Gaza who have been massacred in the process for like a lot of that undoing. But again, trillions of dollars, years and years of propaganda for people who normally would just be like, two-state solution, Israel has the right to defend itself. Two-state solution, Israel has the right to defend itself. To now be saying, oh, so it's like apartheid South Africa, kinda, in some ways. That's bad. So we don't support that no matter who does it, right? Like, no one has a right to apartheid. No one has a right to ethnic cleansing. No one has a right to genocide. That's right. No one does. Nobody ever. Doesn't matter which country it is. They don't have a right to do that. And certainly saying that you were defending that and then saying you deserve weapons should be illegal, right? In addition to that. So all this being said, like, the reality is, yes, on the environment, Trump, much worse. EPA sets landmark clean water rule, but Trump victory will put it at risk. The Biden-Harris administration's new rule mandating the replacement of lead pipes provides another example of the stark difference between the two presidential candidates. The Biden administration on Tuesday set a final rule requiring the requirement for nearly all of the nation's lead pipes within 10 years, a clean drinking water initiative that drew praise from public health experts and advocacy groups. The new rule, which the New York Times and the Washington Post both called landmark, was brought forth by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, requires the replacement of an estimated 9.2 million lead service lines serving millions of people across the country. The reality of the situation, I never could sit here again and tell you, well, they're doing everything in their power to say end the genocide in Gaza. They're not. They're facilitating it, just like Trump will be facilitating it. It seems like in both cases, there's going to be an administration facilitating the genocide of Palestinians because Palestinians have been so dehumanized to this point where it seems completely acceptable to simply wipe them off the face of the earth, as Israel's trying to do right now, and support that. That's absolutely fucking disgusting. And that should be a wake-up call to individuals to stop looking at the trolley machine as a system where you get to pull one of these two levers, and it's like, well, on this one, yeah, Palestinians die, but so do LGBTQ plus people domestically, and so do a whole bunch of other groups. And in this one, the Palestinians die, but then less people domestically, so that one's bad. Like, you should be taking a step back from the whole machine, standing there, and then looking at it and be like, why did we make a genocide machine? Why with variable speeds is what this feels like. It's a genocide machine, but it affects people on other sides of the world worse than it does people here in one setting, and in the other setting, and it kind of accelerates on the both sides. Like, that should be something that you reflect on, because ultimately, like I said, an election isn't single-handedly ever going to suddenly turn an entire system on or off, right? You're not going to, even if we elected Bernie Sanders, you know, and I mean, globally, there are so many people, myself included, who don't even live in America. I was pushing for that so hard because, man, if the world's biggest empire had a social democrat suddenly come into power, one who does recognize, you know, the Palestinian life has worth, even though he is a two-state solution, parodying so many of the same lines, and it's been a deep disappointment as of recently, but still, even if Bernie Sanders had been elected, it wouldn't have been like, it would have been infinitely better than Biden. Infinitely better, especially for the situation post October 7th. Biden was like uniquely just one of the worst human beings on the planet to be the president at that moment in time, just being such a hardcore Zionist. That's like something that he's so proud of, like, you know, in the midst of all of this. No question. But like, to me, it's once again, it's a calculation where you're choosing your enemy. And of two enemies, one of them seems to be putting everything on a trajectory towards far more difficulty, both in the short term and in the long term as well.
Hey, if you'd like to unlock secret bonus episodes as well as uncensored content, go to patreon.com/The Serfs. This show is produced by Anna Loves Riley, Arian McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Poppy, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Travis McClinton, Trincell, Words Greenwood, with additional support coming from all of these amazing human beings right here.